Hey guys, this is Coach AW, and today I want to share a story with you. I think I told you in my bio that I'm a storyteller, and I'm not just a storyteller like the stories we tell kids. I'm a storyteller of life, and this is a life story I want to share with you today. And this is about my mother and her friends. This story is called The Quilters. When I was a little girl, my mom used to take all our old clothes and she would cut all the good pieces from those old clothes and she would put them in a little stack. If the piece couldn't be made into a square, she would cut it into a rectangle. If it couldn't be made into a rectangle, she would cut it into a triangle. But she cut every good piece from our old clothes and she put them in a little stack. And she had a basket and she would put them in that basket. I remember looking at her when she would do that and I would think, that really doesn't make any sense. And I even asked her, what are those? And she called them scraps. And I thought, now being raised in the country, what we call scraps were the leftover food from after we ate. So that's what we call scraps. But she called those little pieces of fabric scraps. And she would put them in the basket. And sometime after, when she would have some downtime, she would start sewing those little pieces of fabric together to make a bigger piece of fabric. Now, I wasn't really sure why she did this, and it really didn't make sense to me. I remember thinking, when I get a grown up, I'm never going to do that. If I want to make a piece of covering for the bed, I'll just go out and buy it. I won't cut little pieces out of old things and sew them back together. That really didn't make any sense to me. Now, I should have got a clue that this was really something important because my mother was the kind that never went and spent the night away from home. But I remember one week she took me and my sister, my two sisters and my two younger brothers, and she took us to her aunt's house, which was a long ways away. And we spent the whole week. And while we was there, her aunt also had a box of scraps. Not only did her aunt have a box of scraps, some of the ladies in the community had a box of scraps. And they all came together. And they took these 4 poles and they hooked them together and they made a rectangle. And then they hung them from the top of the ceiling. And then after they would piece their scraps together, they would take them and stretch them out on that long rectangle pole. Then they would take cotton and put on top of that. Then they would take another layer of these scraps they had pieced together and put on top of that. Then they would take the long needles and pull it through and look like they were tied really tight so the cotton could move in between the 2 pieces of fabric. And as they did this, I would hear them laughing and talking, and they would talk about how to make a cake and how to keep a cake from falling. They would talk about how to go into the woods and pick mulleins to make a tea. They would talk about how to keep children well and how to keep their men happy. I would listen to them, and later on in the day, they would stop talking and one of them would start humming. And there was no words to the song. She would just hum. And another one would kind of join in until all of them were humming together. And sometimes they would look at each other while they were humming. And they would kind of just shake their head. And sometimes they would look, and you would see one of them kind of raise a hand and do like that. And I thought, this is a really strange things that they are doing. Well, as time passed by, I realized that those women were teaching me a very valuable lesson. They taught me life lessons. And the lesson that they taught me was that no matter how, just like an old piece of clothing, people can be like that. And no matter how tattered or worn they look, if you look hard enough, you can find a good piece in that person. And you might have to take that good piece and find another person that just have one good piece. But if you piece them together, you can create a good life, a whole life. Sometimes we have to take the good in us and piece it to that last good piece that's left in a person to make them a whole covering or a whole quilt again. That's the lesson they learned. One of the lessons they taught me. And as I grew older and reflected back on those times, I realized that we as people, we all have the same issues. We all want to keep our children healthy. We all want to make a cake that don't fall. We all want to know, as women, we all want to know how to keep our men happy. Those are life lessons that I learned sitting on the floor watching my mother and her friends as they pieced those pieces of the scraps that were left over together to make a whole again. And then I think back to my cultural, the black cultural, and we have always been quilters. We have always been quilters in life. We have always took what was left over because most of the time that's all we had, and we pieced it together to make a whole. Back in slavery time, women pieced quilts and they put them on the lines outside, and they were called showway quilts. And those quilts, when the slave came, they would point them in the direction that to the north, so they could find freedom. And that's what my mom and them were doing. They were taking the old pieces that other people would have thrown away, and they were piecing them together to create something beautiful. That's how we should be in life. We should never throw people away. Sometimes we might have to step back. Or sometimes we might have to take that scrap and let it stay in the basket for a while. But we should never throw it away, because at some point or sometime in life, we'll be able to take that piece, that good piece that's left, and piece it together and make a whole again. I hope as you go through life that you will remember that life make us all quilters. And I once said when I was a little girl, I would never cut pieces and have scraps. But to tell the truth, I do have a basket of scraps. And sometimes I piece them together and I make a quilt. Maybe for a grandchild or maybe for my bed. Life has a way of making us all into quilters. So this is A.W. Beecham, your life coach, saying, I hope you remember to always take, even if it's the bad pieces, take the small pieces in your life. When you think there is nothing but one little good piece left, take that piece. And if you can't piece it to something good at that moment, put it in your basket. And one day you'll be able to take that scrap and piece it to something and make a covering for your life. This is Coach A.W. saying, you don't have to be invisible, I see you. You don't have to be silent, I'll hear you. And you never have to walk alone, I'll walk with you. Go and be awesome and quilt a beautiful quilt. Bye.